Welcome to the ChillETL demonstration. Hopefully you've read the ChillETL fact sheet and watched our overview video so that you have a good picture of what ChillETL is, because there will be a quiz. Here's your quiz question. Fill in the blanks. ChillETL is if you said complete ETL framework for Azure Data Factory, you passed. You could continue with this slide, with this presentation. If you didn't say it, I don't know anyhow, so you could choose to continue or not. So you're saying, okay, quit this stuff and let's get down to the demo. First, let's briefly talk about the demo scenario. We're going to show how we could import several different data sources into SQL Azure using Azure Data Factory and ChillETL. One data source is an on-premise SQL Server database, AdventureWorks Lite. You're going, oh no, not AdventureWorks again. We're just going to pull the sales order header out of this database, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, so I'm not going to say anything more about it. The second source that we have is Salesforce. So we're going to pull data out of the Salesforce cloud into SQL Azure. Our goal is to take the sales out of AdventureWorks, match them up with the accounts out of Salesforce, so we could produce a Power BI report. To match them, we need a bridge file. So what we have is a CSV file that's been posted to Azure Blob Storage that basically maps the customer ID in AdventureWorks to a Salesforce account number. Where did this file come from? How is it generated? Who cares? This is a demo. Just assume it's magic or something. It's there. Our last source is a SharePoint list. That list has a set of states and territories. So the scenario is that the business user is able to edit this to assign states to different territories. Here's a quick overview of the data flow that we're going to orchestrate through ChillETL and Data Factory. We're going to incrementally copy the data from our different data sources into staging tables in SQL Azure. We're then going to use stored procedures to merge those staging tables into permanent tables. On top of that, we have views created for these permanent tables to provide a semantic layer. Power BI data set will import these views into the in-memory data model to give the business the fast performance they would look for. Our first steps to creating all this, so creating the solution, is we'd have to create an Azure Data Factory resource. In that resource, we would then have to create connections to our different data sources. So the SharePoint, the Salesforce, and the CSV file. We'd also want to connect to the on-premise SQL Server database. To do that, we'd have to install the on-premise integration runtime to have that in place and connect to SQL Server on-prem. Let's say that's been done. Let's just say someone else on your team went ahead and created all these connections for you, and so you're ready to go. They also pointed out to you that you should stop calling them connections, but you should call them linked services. You know anyone on your team who would go to the trouble of pointing that out? Now that we have all our connections created, our next step is to create the pipelines that are required in Data Factory for our processing that we've outlined. For those new to Data Factory, a pipeline is kind of equivalent to a SSIS package. So we need pipelines to copy data from on-premise SQL, Salesforce, import our CSV file, import the SharePoint data. You also are going to have to execute stored procedures and refresh a Power BI data set. Got some good news. ChillETL includes many pre-built pipeline templates. So you could create a Data Factory pipeline by using a template. You download the template to your workstation, and then in less than a minute you go ahead and create it. Here's a quick example. I'm going to go ahead and create a new pipeline from a template. What we're going to do here is choose local template to pick a template that we've downloaded to our workstation. We're going to pick the SQL Server one. We now need to connect it to our on-premise SQL Server database connection that we've already created, the Azure SQL. Choose Use This Template, and we're done. We now have that pipeline created. While you were gone, we went ahead and created the 3 other pipelines for staging data. The next step is scheduling these pipelines. This is where ChillETL really shines. We just have to populate some metadata, trigger the schedule, and we're done. It's time to briefly talk architecture. I've mentioned the ChillETL metadata, so I want to point out where it fits in. This will be quick. Our goal is to move this data to our Azure SQL database. We're going to use Azure Data Factory to handle the data movement. Where the ChillETL comes in is that's going to act as the controller, determining which pipelines need to run when, which ones could be run concurrently, which ones could be run sequentially, and then log all that processing so we could see where ChillETL is at and if anything failed. All this is done by the ChillETL controller talking to a metadata database that would sit in SQL Azure. So part of the process for using ChillETL, a good deal of the time, is spent updating this metadata database. When we designed the product, we said we want to come up with a fast way to populate the metadata database, knowing that a lot of ETL projects involve a lot of redundancy, where maybe I'm importing 50 different tables and I've got to put that list of 50 tables somewhere. And so we said, what would be a fast way to allow the developer to do that? And we decided on using Excel as the front end to our metadata. So you basically can copy and paste and populate long lists of objects fairly quickly. What we've done is we've developed an add-in, we call it the ChillETL add-in, that interfaces between Excel and the ChillETL relational database. Let's see how this works. To use pipelines in ChillETL, we have to define them in the metadata base. This means identifying the pipeline name and its parameters. We do this in Excel data tables. There are 2 ways to populate the SQL database from these Excel data tables. We could have ChillETL generate the SQL statements, paste them into SSMS where we could execute them, or we could have ChillETL Excel execute them directly in the database. This requires connecting to the database using Azure Active Directory authentication. This does not involve your entering any passwords into the add-in. For example, here are the pipelines that we've created for the import. We have 4 of them. We have the name, the description, and some other information. In the Excel add-in, we're going to choose to update the metadata. It shows that it's recognized it as a process type. We're going to come down, copy the SQL to the clipboard, jump over to SQL Server Management in Studio, paste in the SQL, go ahead and hit execute. You'll notice we're executing some stored procedures here. And what we've done here is defined those pipelines to the metadata. Now we have to define the parameters. So we jump over to a different sheet which has the pipeline name and the parameter name and some descriptions. Same idea. Go ahead and hit update, copy the SQL to the clipboard, paste it in here, execute it, and now we've defined the pipelines and their parameters. Once we've defined our pipelines, we then have to define processes to use these pipelines. Multiple processes can use the same pipeline. Here's an example of a process. The process is going to use the ChillETL Salesforce incremental pipeline. It's going to use that pipeline to import the account object in Salesforce into the staging schema in SQL Azure, and it's going to call the table account. And you'll notice we even have a SQL statement that we have in here, which is going to find out the last date, time that we ran this so we could do an incremental load. We take this process, define it to the metadata. Then we also have to define a schedule. And you can see here we have an example of different schedules. You could have as many as you need. Then for a schedule, we define which processes we want to run on that schedule. So you can see this in cell B3, I've got this process stage Salesforce account. And then I've also added in the processes that use the other pipelines to import the SharePoint and CSV and SQL Server file. So to put the process all together with ChillETL, you first define your pipelines, then you define processes that use the pipelines, define your schedules, then once that's all together, you just need a way to trigger the schedule. We use Azure Logic Apps to trigger the schedule. We use Logic Apps because it can integrate with Data Factory, including passing parameters. You could have, in Logic Apps, you could have recurring schedules. You could also have Logic Apps that run on demand or based on other events, including running it just off of a URL. Here's an example of where we have a Logic app that's been created to trigger our daily schedule. So we've created the Logic app. We want to schedule it. So in Azure, we go in, we edit the Logic app, and then the first step in a Logic app is going to be the recurrence. So we're going to go to that recurrence step, and we could go in here and define when we want to run. So you can see there's different parameters here. You could choose a start time, you could choose a time zone. Here we're going to say we want to run it every day, and then we're going to pick certain hours here. So we could go in and maybe we'll pick our time zone is going to be Arizona, so you could guess where I'm recording this from. And then we'll, boy, I'm clicking in the wrong place here. Here you go. So we're going to pick the Arizona time zone and go ahead and pick a start time at 1 in the morning and probably 0 minutes. Go ahead and save this. And this logic app will now call our Data Factory controller every day at 1 in the morning. You could also just run things on demand. So here we're just going to say run this logic app right now on demand, and it's going to go ahead and kick it off. Now that we've triggered our processing, we need a way to monitor and see what's going on. Azure Data Factory does have a monitoring tool, but if you have multiple processes running at one time, it's kind of tough to get a snapshot view. So we want to come up with a tool to give you a real-time view into your processes that are running. Well, if you think about this, all these processes are logged as they're running. They're logged to a SQL database. We're not talking about the application data. We're just talking about logs of when a process started, when it completed, and if it succeeded or failed. So any idea on what tool can report real time in a SQL database? We use Power BI to do a direct connection to the metadata database. Not an import, but a direct connection so we could see our data real time. So here's an example of what the report would look like. You can see it's told us the processes, started, end, and whether or not they succeeded. You'll notice we have one process called setup query. That is a process that if you have SQL Azure running in a serverless environment and you've paused it, we use that process to kind of run a few queries to wake it up before the rest of our processing happens. So what's missing from all our processing? Well, if you recall, we incrementally staged data, but now we have to use stored procedures to merge that staging table, those staging tables, into permanent tables. And our stored procedures are going to look pretty much like this. Just make use of the SQL merge statement to merge the data in staging into the target table based on a primary key. So once we create these stored procedures, and by the way, ChillETL has a tool that will automatically generate the SQL from a data dictionary. So if you're thinking, oh, now I have to write maybe 50 stored procedures, the answer is, if you get all that metadata into a data dictionary, you could use ChillETL to generate those 50 stored procedures. In any case, now that we've created these stored procedures, we now need Data Factory to execute them. And Data Factory does come with a execute stored procedure activity that we could just drop in, give it the name of a stored procedure, connection, and let it run. So what you're thinking is, okay, we create 4 pipelines for our 4 stored procedures. Go ahead and publish them, and we're ready to go. Wrong. That's not our approach. Our approach is to create one pipeline, define as a parameter the stored procedure name, and then plug that into the pipeline so this parameter can be passed to this pipeline to tell it what stored procedure to run. This may seem somewhat simplistic, but this is actually the secret sauce behind ChillETL. The fact that we use object-oriented programming principles in ETL to minimize how many different pipelines have to be created. Once we've created this one pipeline, we then have to go into ChillETL and define the pipeline and the process that's going to use it. So let's see how that would work. Here, we're back in the Excel spreadsheet. We're going to go ahead and put in the name of our pipeline. We're going to put in a description. The value of these descriptions is later on. You have a way to generate all this metadata. And now we're going to go ahead, and in this case, we're going to update our metadata by just executing it directly in the database as opposed to copying and pasting. Here's the key thing. We now have to define what the parameter is for this pipeline. And here's where the description is important so someone understands what they would populate the parameter with. Same thing, we're going to go ahead and execute our update, and now we've processed the metadata. Now that we've defined that pipeline, we have to define a process to reference it. So here, we're going to just say we want to create a new process sheet from that pipeline we just defined. We're going to give this sheet some sort of name. And now we're going to go in and put in the stored procedure that we want to run. So we have one called account merge. We're going to name the process. The process needs a unique name. We're going to go ahead and the names can have spaces. We're going to put in a description for documentation purposes. We also are going to put in a timeout setting so that ChillETL will cancel the pipeline if it runs over that timeout. And then we have to indicate the phase that this is going to run in. So we have different phases defined. We're going to have this run in our processing phase. So you may still be wondering, why are we using Excel as a front end to the metadata? Well, let's think about the scenario. We have 3 more stored procedures to define. Those 3 stored procedures could use that same pipeline, but we have to define those processes. What happens if we had 30 more? Let me show you how by just using Excel formulas and copy and paste, we could add the 3 just as fast as we would add the 30. So what we're going to do is go to that first sheet, and where we put this information, we're now going to put in some Excel formulas. So you can see here, we just changed our process name to execute proc and whatever the name of the proc name is in column H. We've also updated our description to do the same. So now we could just paste in the other 3 procedures we need to run, do copy paste. Now update our metadata. Just say these are all processes. Go ahead and hit execute SQL. And now we've defined those processes to the metadata database. If we had 30, it would have been just the same. Now we've got to add them to the schedule. So again, using copy and paste, we could now copy our process names out of here, jump over to our process schedule, paste them in, copy down the word daily, which is our schedule code, launch the ChillETL update metadata, go ahead and hit execute SQL, and now we've added those 4 processes in to the metadata database. Now we're going to jump back into Logic Apps, run our trigger on demand, and we've kicked off that schedule. And now jump over to Power BI, refresh our Power BI report. Again, this is real time, and taking a couple of seconds to connect. And you can see now we have our 3rd phase, which is processing. So Our last step is addressing the Power BI report that we've built off of this data. We want this report to be refreshed after our processing is complete. So you may think, well, Power BI has a scheduler, so I could just use that scheduler. The problem is the scheduler is time-based. How do we know when we would want to refresh? This ends up being a problem in that if you pick a time too soon, then your Power BI report could be refreshed before your ETL is done. So you usually end up allowing a pretty large buffer of time. The problem with that is that delays when the data is available to the business. The alternative is Power BI has a REST API in which you can trigger a data set to be refreshed programmatically. Azure Data Factory can call that REST API. ChillETL includes a pipeline for calling that API, and this way a refresh could happen right after your data processing is completed. So that template that we provide, you would just create a pipeline in Data Factory, import the template in like was demonstrated earlier, plug in the metadata, which is basically the name of the workspace the Power BI report is in and the data set, and that's it. You would end up being able to have your report run right after your processing is complete. So now you're all set and everything will run without any problem. Of course, that's not real world. Sooner or later, you run into errors. The problem with errors when it comes to ETL is it's very time critical. Usually you get your failure first thing in the morning when the business is waiting for data and you have to quickly figure out what failed, how to fix it, and then what you need to rerun. So let's look at how ChillETL would help you here. If there's a failure, you would get an email. ChillETL uses logic apps to generate these emails. So you would get an email and it would tell you there was a failure and what happened. So in this case, it says one of our stored procedure failed. This is the one that's importing the CSV file. It turns out that someone changed a column name in the CSV file, which caused everything to break. Have you ever run into a situation like that? Dumb question. Everyone in ETL has run into that many times. So let's say we go ahead and fix this. We had to fix our table and our stored procedure. And now let's see how we would use ChillETL to rerun our process. So what we would do is if we were looking at the report, we would see here's where we had a failure. So that same message that got emailed is what's available in the report. When we could drill down, go into the report, and read the email message a little better, but you'll also see there's a retry link. This retry link is actually going to Logic Apps, and it's going to retry our schedule. So not at the very beginning, but it's going to use the controller to decide what processes need to run. So we're going to go ahead and refresh this report. And you could see that the first thing it's going to do is it's going to run the setup query. The reason why it's running that is we define that as something that has to run every time, including in cases of a retry, because this is where we're doing this wake up of serverless. There may be other things that are going on in that initial phase. After that, you'll notice it bypassed all the staging It bypassed the stored procedures that had run successfully, and the only thing that is running right now is that stored procedure that failed. So without us having to cancel things or anything, just do a retry, it automatically runs what needs to be run. And now, after that succeeds, the next step is to go ahead and refresh our Power BI report. So now it's running the Power BI report because that is something that was a dependency that didn't happen yet. And after that Power BI report is done, we've fairly quickly recovered from that failure. So what's next? If I were you, I'd say, well, this looks great in a demo, but I'm wondering if this will run in my environment. So we offer a ChillETL trial. Basically, try it before you buy it. The buy it is buying the ChillETL controller. So you get to see how it works in your environment and connecting to your data before making the investment in the ChillETL controller. To find out how, just shoot a quick email over to info@CloudDataSolutions. Thank you for your time.